Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm so happy you're with us today. My dear friends, at about this time every year, we visit with someone who joins us to talk about an old friend of Seek Reality. He or she, and sometimes it's been a she, comes to share with us a burgeoning spiritual movement that's based in a better understanding of what really is going on. Many people are familiar with spiritualism, which is a 19th century spirits-based movement based in England. And Spiritism is something different. Spiritism also began in the 19th century, but it's based in the 19th century teachings of Allan Kardec. And while it's now robustly based in Brazil, it's also a pretty rapidly growing spiritual movement in the United States as well. And the U.S. Spiritist Federation is holding its 18th Symposium on September 21st in Boston. It's called Life Through the Lens of Immortality. And I just really have to say, I love that title. We are always, each year, delighted to help them get the word out. So we always have someone come and talk about it. And this year, one of my favorite people in the U.S. Spiritist Federation has sent us Peter Hayes again at my request, because we so much enjoyed talking with him, frankly, the last time he was here. Peter Hayes works at Spiritist Group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey. I've forgotten what that is. He's told me before. He's also the current outreach director of the United States Spiritist Federation and is an active participant in the Tri-State Spiritist Federation as well. Peter has published several children's books with his wife through their company, which is called Sem Fronteiras Press, and with other publishers in Brazil, Colombia, and the U.S. And their books are adorable. I've seen them. He has an extensive background in theater, and he holds a Master of Fine Arts in Dramatic Writing as well from New York University. He currently also works in commercial real estate. Peter, welcome. I'm so glad you're back again. It's great. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
So let's just talk a bit about Spiritism itself, because it's different from spiritualism.
Right.
Just tell us a little about it from people who aren't familiar with it.
Well, Spiritism was originated with the efforts of Allan Kardec, who that was a pseudonym, that name. And he was a French educator who was interested in the phenomena of spirits. At first, he was a little skeptical about it, but to make a very long story short, he put together what's called the Spiritist Codification, which is made up of 5 books. The Spiritist book, which was first published in 1857, and then a revised edition in 1858. And then came the Medium's book, which was an in-depth study of mediumship. And then the third book was called The Gospel According to Spiritism, which is a understanding of the teachings of Jesus from the perspective of us being immortal spirits. And then the fourth book was the book Heaven and Hell, which in part focuses or questions certain traditional teachings like hell's a place of permanent punishment, and rather it suggests that what we experience on the other side is really a state of our current state of being, and that it's subject to change. And the more that we evolve and work on our spiritual progress, the more the environment that we experience on the other side will change. Generally, it's a comment about cause and effect. And then the last book is a book called Genesis, which focuses on some of the overview of the Spiritist philosophy, religion, and science. It touches on some of the experiences that Jesus went through and the implications that are in that. So Spiritism began with what's called the Spiritist codification, those 5 books. Spiritism is really a combination of philosophy, religion, and science, and it applies all 3. Philosophy in part because philosophy in trying to understand the nature of our existence, understanding what truth means, understanding our responsibilities in the world, understanding the nature of mind and language and so forth. Philosophy is based on rational or logical explanations for things. But that's not the only way we have information. The religious aspect in Spiritism is that it follows the teachings of Jesus. You don't have to be a Christian, I would like to suggest, but rather, if you look at the universal teachings of Jesus, there's a strong focus on Christianity as the religious foundation of Spiritism. But I know people who are not Christians who are very interested and attracted to Spiritism. And I'll explain why in a moment. And then the third part is science, because Spiritism strongly advocates in investigation of what we call spirit phenomena, or at least raising the question, the nature of our existence. Is it purely a physical cause, or are there non-physical causes as well? What's the real nature of causality when it comes to the nature of our existence? And so Spiritism encourages scientific inquiry into areas like mediumship. In fact, Spiritism argues that mediumship is a very legitimate way of proving that there is a non-physical world out there, and in particular that spirits exist and that spirits are immortal, and that the purpose of spirits and why we exist to begin with is to work on our spiritual progress. You mentioned spiritualism. One difference between spiritualism and Spiritism is that Spiritism does emphasize reincarnation as being the vehicle for our spiritual progress. And in doing so, what Spiritism is saying is that when we go through the process of reincarnation, every time we come back, it's an opportunity to develop another aspect of our very selves, our very being. It is impossible for any of us to learn everything and experience what we need to experience to develop and further our spiritual progress in a single lifetime. And so Spiritism tries to make the logical argument that if we only had one chance and one chance only, and we were only the product of the physiology of our bodies, and that's it, and it all ends when we die, then none of us would have a chance of ever achieving any great significant spiritual progress. Yes,
Right.
we can make a lot of progress in a single lifetime, that's true.
Right.
But do we really experience enough in one lifetime to accomplish everything that we're capable of accomplishing? So again, Spiritism stresses that we're immortal spirits, which is the theme of this year's symposium, by the way, the 18th
Yeah, I love
Spiritist
the title.
Symposium.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's the 18th U.S. Spiritist Symposium, called Life Through the Lens of Immortality, the Philosophy of Spiritism. That's the theme for this year's symposium. Every symposium we do has a different theme, but also a different location. This year, it will be in Boston on Saturday, September 21st, from 9 to 6. Doors open at 9:30. The program actually starts at 10 a.m. And it will be at the Westin Copley Place Hotel, which is in Boston, happens to be 10 Huntington Avenue. That's a little bit west of downtown Boston, a little bit southwest of Beacon Hill, and kind of in the back row area. And the entire program will be at that one location on that day. And for more information, it is www.spiritistsymposium.org. And there you can not only register for the program, but you'll get all the information on what the program is, who the speakers are going to be, and the logistics of how to get there.
And all this information will also be attached to this broadcast. So there's no need to drive off the road trying to write that down.
Right.
We'll
Okay.
use that information, or you can just, if all else fails, just send me an email and I'll make sure you have that information. But
Okay.
I think that this is a very, very useful and important organization. That's why we try to publicize it every year. I did study what Allan Kardec was doing I think couple decades back. And I thought that of all the organizations one could follow, this was the closest to the truth that I had separately discovered. And one of the reasons I felt that way was because he had learned to incorporate reincarnation in his studies. He had discovered that reincarnation was essential to spiritual growth. You needed to repeatedly come back. And the only question was, how many times did you need to come back? You could conceivably come once to this reality, but because we come here not knowing what we're doing,
Right.
You have to come back usually at least a few times in order to learn.
Yeah.
Learn.
Spiritism does say or emphasize that as spirits, whenever we began, we're born simple and ignorant, as they say, which means we're not dumb, rather we just don't know a lot of things.
Don't know what's going on.
So
right.
we have to go through all the trials of life, the vicissitudes of life, in order to gain experience to learn from our mistakes. But Spiritism stresses that God, besides being all-knowing and all-compassionate, that God will give us as many times as we need in order to learn the lessons that we need. So a very simple analogy is if you're in school and you're in a grade and you're struggling to get good marks, so to speak, if you don't do well, you'll get a chance to repeat and try again.
Right.
Rather than be punished and humiliated because you're such an awful, terrible person and you should have known better. It's rather it's a more compassionate approach in which it is a given that we're going to make all kinds of mistakes. And, it's a little bit like when Jesus was on the cross and he said, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." Rather than being angry and vindictive at those who directly called for his crucifixion and then those who were whipped up into a frenzy, collectively, they were individuals who didn't know what they were doing, really, because they had no idea what the long-term implications of their acts were. And how often do any of us go through that kind of experience where we do this choice, we make that choice, but we don't really know what we're doing? But God understands that, and God knows that we're like little children in the beginning, and we have to learn. But then the other part that Spiritism stresses is that as we go through the reincarnation process, however many times it takes, there's not a set number. It could be a few, it could be several. Probably for most of us, it's several. But whatever we go through, we're expected to learn as we move along. And the more we learn, the more we begin to develop consciousness. This is, of course, a cornerstone of psychology, and psychology is a subject that Spiritism is very interested in and very supportive of and spends a lot of time. There are programs that focus on Spiritism's relationship to psychology. The psychology of spirituality is one program that the United States Spiritist Federation does. And one of the reasons for that is because consciousness is key. the more we develop consciousness, of course, the more responsibility we have. And the more responsibility we have, the more we're subject to all of the possibilities of cause and effect. And Spiritism, by stressing reincarnation, is also stressing cause and effect. Whatever actions there is some kind of reaction. The reaction varies a lot depending upon not only what we do, what acts we commit, but what our intentions are, how much we know, how much we don't know. Do we try to make amends if we realize we made a mistake, or do we not? Again, what kind of responsibility do we take for everything that we do or everything we don't do? Do we have the emotional honesty and the courage and the humility to, for instance, admit when we've made mistakes? And that's one type of, if we do, then we're liable to have one type of reaction of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we just go through life and make no apologies, I've never done anything wrong, and have no humility whatsoever,
Right.
that might be a more severe reaction. But God's reaction, it's not intended to be vindictive or punishing. It's like gravity. We're subject to the laws of gravity. If we jump off a cliff, God forbid, but if we do, we're going to fall, right?
Right. That's true.
So life through the lens of immortality is saying that we, first of all, we have a spirit. The spirit is immortal, and the spirit is subject to natural laws. And so that was one thing that Allan Kardec stressed a lot in the Spiritist codification, that we're subject to natural laws. And one of them, it's argued, is cause and effect. This is all based, by the way, on testimony from a variety of spirits from the other side through mediumship. Again, one of the ways that Spiritism makes the case for the immaterial world is mediumship. I'll mention, I do want to focus a little bit on what the U.S. Spiritist Symposium is going to focus on. But I'll just say very quickly, there have been studies done, quite a few in the last 150 years, on the subject of mediumship and near-death experiences and PSI and everything else, right? You're quite familiar with that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So this is an area that deserves more inquiry, and we're really, in many ways, at the beginning. In fact, it's even a question as to what paradigm might be the best paradigm. So we're still at a stage where many different approaches to this stuff can be approached, scientifically speaking, to see what makes the most sense. But Spiritism is certainly questioning this notion that we're nothing more than physical causes and that's it. That aren't, when we talk about consciousness and mind, is it purely from a physical cause, or is there a spiritual component? And what does that really mean? Well, Spiritism has a lot of opinions about that, but this is a subject that in today's world is still very much a question that hasn't been fully resolved in a way that, many people either accept or have come to terms with in some way. Mm-hmm. But the U.S. Spiritist Symposium, in its theme on life through the lens of immortality, it makes a big difference if we are indeed immortal spirits. But right. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly outline some of the features of this year's symposium. There's going to be 6 sessions. First, there'll be a video that kind of gives an overview of what philosophy is, because part of what Spiritism focuses on is philosophy, the nature of our existence, what does that mean, and so forth, and done through logical arguments. But philosophy is not the same thing as science, which of course relies on empirical evidence and verification,
Mhm.
and religion, which is often a set of beliefs that are based upon a certain understanding of the world, can often be based on faith. Faith is, by its nature, something that you may not really can't prove empirically, because if you can prove something empirically, it doesn't need to be faith anymore. It is
Right.
real. But
Wonderful
we
point.
often
Yes.
live with faith, and faith plays a very important role in our lives, as does religion,
Yes.
in terms of our emotional health and mental health and so forth. So the video will be an outline of what philosophy is. That's the first part of the program for the U.S. Spiritist Symposium. And then the of the 6 sessions, the first one's going to focus on kind of the philosophical origins of Spiritism from Socrates, Plato, Pythagoras, I'm guessing, all the way up to Kardec, because there are certain thinkers from our philosophical history that helped lay the groundwork and the context for Spiritism. Certainly Socrates, Plato, um, uh, Rene Descartes, Immanuel Kant, and so forth, Rousseau, and so forth.
That's another thing I like about Spiritism.
Mhm.
It's for thinkers, it's for
It
sophisticated
is.
people.
It is.
Yes.
Just very quick point. Spiritism requires a great deal of study. You have to want to do that sort of thing, because Spiritism is about self-improvement,
Yes.
but it's not just study. It's also about, well, how do we put this into practice in our daily lives, and how can I benefit as a result of spending time with this subject?
And one of the things that I
Mhm.
like about it is
Mhm.
that I hear from people who have been turned off by the Christian religion in part because
Mhm. Mhm.
there's no place to go with it. They want to be able to be deep thinkers and learn more and go somewhere with it, and there
Mhm.
is nowhere to
Mhm.
go with it. With
Okay.
this, you know, he frankly he developed places people could go if they wanted to learn more.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
It's easy.
Because, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, just
Okay.
deep. It really, you
Mhm.
keep going, you keep digging in there, you can always find something. It's great.
Yes. And a lot of times when you've read one passage from a book in the Spiritist codification, when you go back and read it again, it'll speak to you differently,
Yes,
because we are in a different place.
right.
Uh, and one of the things that Spiritism does is has, of course, a great deal of respect and reverence for Christianity, but it does
For
also,
Jesus, for Jesus as
absolutely,
a thinker,
absolutely,
yes,
yeah. It sees Jesus more as the most evolved being that ever was on the planet.
yes,
And one of the things it stresses, though, and one can make the argument for this, is that there's room in Christianity for the possibility of reincarnation, which I know is a controversial subject among Christians. I get that.
no,
But
you're
also
right,
in
but
Judaism.
that's exactly right. Reincarnation does happen, and I think Jesus talked about it.
Yes, and Spiritism, the Gospel, the third book in the codification, the Gospel according to Spiritism, focuses on that, among other things, and
Yes,
stresses how that's possible.
yes,
Certainly in Judaism, and of course, Judaism is the foundation of Christianity.
yes,
There's room for reincarnation in Judaism as well.
right.
Kabbalah,
Sure.
the whole mystical side of Judaism, which came centuries later after the Torah and the Hebrew Bible as a whole.
Uh-huh.
Uh, that there's room in Judaism for that as well. And so it's not that Spiritism's understanding of the nature of our existence is in a vacuum. And I think I've said this to you before, but I'll repeat it. Spiritism does blend Christianity with Eastern religions too, in terms of Buddhism, Hinduism,
Right.
which of course do
It
talk a great deal about.
all fits together.
Right,
Exactly.
right. Because at the end of the day, if we are immortal spirits, either all of us are, and that is the nature of our existence, that's
Mhm.
part of who we are, or it isn't.
Yeah.
It applies to everyone. And this
Yes.
is one of the things that Spiritism tries to stress in its focus on saying there's the physical world that we all are experiencing here and now, but there's also the non-physical world, which is the more permanent one, because to make an obvious point, everything we go through here is temporary. The only thing we take with us is what we learn and who we are as varied beings, but everything else we don't hang on to, of course.
And I think Spiritism is the only philosophy that does this successfully. At least it's the only one
Mm.
I've found.
Mm. It's great to hear, but yeah. So the first session in the U.S. Spiritist Symposium will focus on do an overview of some of the philosophical trends that lead up to Spiritism, its roots, you could say. The second will be a panel discussion that focuses on the nature of our immortal souls, our immortal selves. So we'll focus on areas like reincarnation, immortality, free will, and so forth. And these sessions are each roughly about 50 minutes to an hour each. The third one is going to be a youth panel, because one of the features of the U.S. Spiritist Symposium has been to involve the youth, and they will share with us what life is like for them, and talks about how the Spiritist approach is for everyone, but it also helps youth by giving them a lot of ways of coping with some of the things that they go through at that stage in their lives. And then so that'll be, that's always a wonderful panel, and we often have, I know some of the youth that'll be speaking, and they're very sharp and they're very thoughtful, and it's very encouraging to see how they see the world and how insightful they can be. And then the fourth session will be the moral and ethical dimensions of life in the spirit. This one's going to focus a little bit more on the role that mediumship can play, not only in our lives, but more specifically in our spiritual progress. Not everyone is. In theory, all of us have some capacity for mediumship, but not everyone is an overt, or we often use the word ostensive medium. But
Right.
nevertheless, mediumship is the vehicle through which we can have contact with the non-physical world, and therefore it plays a very significant role in our spiritual progress. So that panel, or that session number 4, will focus on the implications of that. And then session number 5 is going to focus on the scientific investigations, some of them that have been done on what we call the afterlife, and what some of what discoveries have been made up to this point, but arguing that there is compelling evidence out there that there is a non-material cause for things as well as a material cause, as outlined through a spiritual component, or just saying, basically addressing the subject that I mentioned before, that, is the totality of our minds only through the physiology of our body and our brains? Is it all the workings of synapses and neurons and so forth? Or is there something beyond that too? Which again is very much a subject that has not been resolved in the world of science by a long shot. But
Oh, yeah,
never.
that's for sure. Right.
And then the last session will just be a Q&A with some of the participants from the previous sessions. And I think what this year's symposium is doing is certainly calling attention to the implications of what it means if we are immortal spirits, as a way of defining ourselves. And it's going to focus on more of a theoretical, philosophical implications of that. It's also going to focus on some scientific studies done in this field, but it's also focusing on the practical. How do I apply this to my everyday life? What does this mean for me as an individual? And what can I take You know, how do, I mean, there's a lot of ways to tackle that question, but if we see ourselves and understand that we are immortal spirits, doesn't that have a profound effect on everything that we go through from one day to the next as to how we respond to it, how
Right.
we handle it? If you feel that you have just one shot and that's it, and there's no more life at all, and we evaporate into nothingness, well, that's a lot of pressure if we feel like we didn't succeed. And if
But
we
the point
feel,
is, it's
yeah,
fundamentally wrong. It's
mhm,
it's untrue. That what frustrates me about the
mhm,
fact that science peddles that idea,
mhm,
which it
mhm,
still does, although
right,
a little bit less than it used to. It's more questioning now than it ever has
yeah,
been.
right,
But but that's the point is it's a wrong-headed idea that and there's so
yeah,
much evidence now that life does continue.
right.
Um,
At the end of the day, yeah,
is there a
sorry.
cost for this?
Is there a cost? Yes. Oh gosh. The registration is, I don't want to misquote it, but you have to go online to double check. It's not very expensive though. I, I want to say it's around $60, $70, and I apologize if I misstate what the
Yeah,
amount is.
I thought there was a small fee, but I just didn't know what it
Yeah,
was.
but it's not a very expensive thing to participate in by any means. I mean, it's
Yeah,
a full day program. So
we'll put the cost with the
I should stress, by the way, that Spiritism is a nonprofit activity. The United States Spiritist Federation and all Spiritist centers, well, the United States Spiritist Federation is a registered nonprofit, and not all Spiritist centers, but many are registered nonprofits, and they operate on very small budgets. Whatever money they raise usually goes to either pay the bills, which of course need to be done, or it could be done for charitable activities. But if you
right,
want to participate in a study group at a typical Spiritist center, there's no charge at all. Spiritist centers do encourage donations, of course, because again, they need to cover their costs. But that's the gist of it. All Spiritists are volunteers or no paid professionals in this movement at all,
right.
which, you know,
It's like any other spiritual organization there
right.
or religion. That's
Yeah.
basically
And actually that while I'm thinking about it, like in the world subject of mediumship, Allan Kardec was very opposed to charging for mediumship. And
right,
the reason is because mediumship's a very delicate process that is subject, first of all, for mediumship to happen, you need a spirit that's willing and wants to communicate, and you need a medium who can receive that spirit. So it's a collaboration. And if a medium is expecting to have a spiritual cooperation on demand, whenever someone has paid him or her to do so, that's kind of dubious. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't very talented and ostensive mediums that do charge, but it's not something that Spiritism does. So, just to stress that Spiritism's approach to mediumship is that it should not involve money in that way.
right, right,
So again, just to go back to my point about the U.S. Spiritist Symposium, there is a fee to get in, but it's not a significant one. And again, you can study Spiritism at a Spiritist center absolutely free.
And the beauty of it is they're really all religions are are flying amber. They're frozen in time at a
mhm,
period when
mhm,
people didn't know much about the world and
mhm,
they stopped growing at that time,
mhm,
whether it's 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, whenever it was.
mhm,
And unlike any of those institutions,
mhm,
uh, Spiritism is always learning, always
Yeah.
growing. And that makes it unique as far as I'm concerned. They're always trying to ever better understand what's
Mhm.
really going on.
I mean, Allan Kardec stressed, for instance, that he laid out a lot of hypotheses and he did investigation. He did a lot of experimentation with mediumship to better understand what this is about. But he also said that as time goes on, if science discovers something about the nature of our existence that has resolved the question once and for all, whatever that may be, we have to follow science. So Spiritism stresses flexibility. We don't know everything. There are certain things we do know. There's a lot we don't know, probably generally speaking, more that we don't know than what we do know. And we have
Right.
to be able to adapt as knowledge comes in, as evidence comes in, as insights come in. But at the same time, it does stress that truth will stand the test of time. And that's one way to know if something has validity or not. If we're if one's propagating an idea that may be very fashionable but is kind of flawed,
Mhm.
time will resolve that so that eventually, if it's really um, a sophist idea of some kind, it will eventually be seen for what it really is.
Yes, yes. Well, that's it. This is fun. I always love to talk to you about all of this
Okay.
and what these
Mhm.
people are doing because
Mhm.
precisely because this is a different spiritual movement. And this is a
Mhm.
wonderful way for someone or for a couple or for a family to, spend a Saturday and
Yes,
be learning about something new that is actually new, that is actually an ever-growing situation.
it's a great way to meet people because there are spiritist centers. There's a few of them in the Boston area, especially up in Cambridge and west of Cambridge and so forth. So there are people from the Boston area who will be there. There are spiritist centers in Connecticut, and I'm sure people from there will definitely be coming. There are spiritist centers in New York State as well as New Jersey, and all of us will be going there. There are spiritist centers in Florida, quite a few, and people from there will be coming. There are spiritist centers in Texas, same thing, California as well. There are spiritist centers in many parts of the U.S. So those are the ones that probably have the most spiritist centers, but there's Washington State, there's Oregon, there's Chicago, certainly, Ohio, um, and I'm no doubt I'm missing others. Uh, Learned recently about one in Nevada, in Las Vegas area, and so forth. So there's um, spiritist centers in many areas. North Carolina, for instance, and Maryland, of course, has got a very active community, as well as Virginia. And so people who are often the U.S. Spiritist Symposium is made up of people from all over the country if they can make the trip. And,
But the point is that unlike most religions, this is a fairly rapidly growing movement, which is spiritual in nature
Mhm.
and where you can grow as a spiritually oriented person.
Yes, and you're
Well,
not being asked to give up your religious background. So if you are a Christian and practicing Christian, you can there's no effort to try to convince you to stop doing that or anything like that.
this is a way you can add. Yes.
Yes, you can add to it. If you're Jewish, you could be involved in Spiritism. I don't see why not.
No.
Uh, I
Right.
Muslims generally don't believe in reincarnation per se, but if one comes from that background and is open to this and is intrigued, we're not going to tell them anybody that you have to give up your religious orientation in order to be a spiritist.
We have unfortunately, come to the end of our time.
Okay.
And um, Morrison, my cat has actually not my cat, my daughter's cat has jumped in my lap to let me know that that's the case. It said, stop talking and let me out. So instead, I think I'm just going to say, we've come to the end of our time. What do you want people to take from this experience of hearing us talk about this? What do you
I
hope?
think the important thing is this is an invitation for all of us to really think about what does it mean if we define ourselves as immortal spirits?
Say that
What
again,
does that
because
mean?
that sounded very important. Say that
What
again.
does it mean when we define ourselves as immortal spirits as opposed to physiological beings that once we die, that's it?
What
And
does it
there's,
mean? Think more deeply about what that means.
yes,
I think it changes everything.
it changes everything. It raises all kinds of questions about responsibility and how that plays a role in our life. It makes a big difference if you go through life believing there is a future and we will play a role in that and we're answerable to the future in some way versus going through life with this attitude of there's no tomorrow and everything I do doesn't matter anyways.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So that to me is a large part of what this symposium is going to try to touch on. It's a big subject, of course, but
Oh, it's gigantic.
yes,
Because if life is eternal, it changes literally everything.
everything. It's a major foundational shift as to who we really are.
Yeah, it changes everything. Wow. All right. Well, I guess that's what your life and mine really are about, helping people grapple with first coming to understand that that's
Hmm.
true,
Right.
and then figure out what it really means in
Yeah,
each
because
life.
everything we go through now, even if it's really, really big and it's really overwhelming, if we're immortal spirits, everything we're going through now is just a tiny little pinprick of the entire journey that we're on.
Yeah,
It's
because that
it's you
journey
know
is forever.
it's the planet Earth in relation to the entire universe.
Yeah.
And for us, this is like the center of everything. It's sometimes it feels that way. All the things we go through on a daily basis. But
But
in the grand scheme of things,
it's nothing.
it's
That's right.
it's just a moment.
It's just a moment. It's something,
It's
but
important, and I'm not minimizing it. We should make the most of that moment. That's something that Spiritism stresses a lot. We should always. It's what Jesus emphasizes about planting seeds. That what we do now does make a difference,
the
makes a
grain,
big
it's like a grain
difference.
of mustard seed, which is the tiniest of all the seeds, but when
Yes,
it's fully grown, it fills the garden, and
right.
birds can nest in its branches. Oh, how that, what a wonderful,
Exactly. It's a great image for thinking about our relationship to not only ourselves, to one another, but in terms of the, humanity as a whole.
wow. Wow.
And that everyone matters and we're all equal in the eyes of God. We all have an opportunity for spiritual progress. And another thing I would add is we're not defined permanently by what we look like, our gender, our race. It's where we are at the moment. But spirits are defined by their very being, the what we learn and grow over time, not by our physical surroundings, including what we look like. 'Cause all
Absolutely.
that's temporary. Yeah.
Thank you, my dear. That is so beautiful. Well, everyone, we have come to the end of our time. Please always, always remember that you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began, you never will end. And when you get what that means, all of what it means, as you've just heard from our wonderful, wonderful friend, Peter Hayes, that changes everything in your life for the better. Next week, our guest will be Nicole Froelich. She'll be here just for the second time, but when she was here for the first time, I heard from a lot of people that they wanted to hear from her again. So she's coming back as soon as I could get her back. She refers to herself as a practical mystic who does intuitive life coaching, inner child healing, and the reclamation of one's secret self. She says that this process uncovers the hidden strengths, talents, and untapped purpose of the soul. She has more than 25 years of experience in the realm of healing the mind, body, and soul connections. And she's discovered methods that can help people to rebirth themselves and emerge as their most authentic self in the greatest path of their destiny. She made, really, as I say, quite an impact the first time, so I invited her to come back. I think you're going to love this, so please be sure to join us again next week. And today, we've been talking with Peter Hayes. Now, I have loved having Peter Hayes with us once again to talk about the Spiritist Federation, because I've come to really love the Spiritist Federation. And unlike every other Spiritist spiritual group that I have ever heard of, I think that they're about the future. They're about growth, and not only about the past, because we've got to be connected with our past as well as about our future. Now, the U.S. Spiritist Federation is holding its 18th Symposium on September 21st in Boston. It's called Life Through the Lens of Immortality. And in one day, if you're anywhere near Boston, I really recommend you think about this. September 21st in Boston, in one day, you can come to know who these people are and what they are about. And I really urge you to do it, because if you have a background in, say, Christianity, they can take you with Jesus into a future beyond what is a very limiting religion. And if anyone knows that, wow, it's me. Spiritism is growing quite rapidly now in America, because a lot of people have found Christianity to be so limiting. Allan Kardec, and that I remember now, is it's a pseudonym. That's not the name of the man who actually founded this, but he was a real deep thinker, and he used and broadly read, and he used some of the greatest teachings of the greatest people who ever lived to build something which I think is really extraordinary. And I think you'll be delighted if you go to this one-day event. You'll learn more about it in the materials that go with this recording. But golly, I think you ought to try it. I'm going to see if perhaps Sandra Champlain can also give them some publicity. We're delighted each year to help them get the word out. Now, as you know, also our great friend Craig Hogan is the president of Seek Reality Online. Yeah, whether you like it or not, you are an eternal being, so you may as well go to seekreality.com and start learning about what it really means to be an eternal being. Get ready, because sooner or later the day will come when you finally get to go and learn the ultimate truth from those who are already there. They'll welcome you, they'll show you around, but it would be nice if you knew a little bit, sort of like studying the places where you're going to go on that ultimate trip around the world. You may as well get to know a little bit about it beforehand. And teachingsbyjesus.com is your single resource for all the beautiful divine truths that are brought to us in perfect love by the greatest teacher of them all, Master Jesus. Also, as you know, I have books, but there's no time to talk about them because we've already run over our time. And if you want to talk about anything at all with me, or just say hi, you can always go to the green contact block on robertagrimes.com and just send me an email. I answer all my emails, but it can take a couple of weeks now because I get so many of them. And all of the more than 550 past episodes of Seek Reality are available wherever audio podcasts can be found. And the new video episodes, of which I guess, I don't know, there are 100 or more now, are all available on Roku, Fire Stick, YouTube, and elsewhere. Meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Please enjoy, please make the most of this coming week in our one reality, always knowing that you are a powerful, eternal being, and you, most of all, in this whole gigantic, eternal reality, you, most of all, are infinitely, eternally, and perfectly loved.
You've been listening to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Join us every week as we explore what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about the one reality we all share. Knowing the truth changes everything.